Welcome to Relative, our family mess. Here, I bring you the raw, unspoken stories of older men betrayed by the very families they spent a lifetime protecting, and the dark secrets hidden within the modern home. Now, here is today's story.
My name is Amos McBride. I am 67 years old, and on Thanksgiving night, in a restaurant far too expensive for the food it served, I sat very still and watched my own family decide that my mother no longer deserved a seat at the table. I did not slam my fist down. I did not raise my voice. I have spent my whole life learning how machines behave under pressure, and I learned long ago that the loudest part of any breakdown is never the part that matters. The part that matters is quiet. It is the hairline crack you cannot see until the whole thing comes apart in your hands. Let me tell you about that table. There were 5 of us that night. My mother, Regina, who was 89 years old and who raised me alone after my father left, working 2 jobs, so I would never know how thin our walls really were. My wife, Lainey, who spent 30 years as a night shift nurse and still wakes at the smallest sound, as if some patient somewhere still needs her. Myself, a retired engineer with grease worked so deep into the lines of my hands that no soap has ever fully reached it. And across from us, my son, Weston, and his wife, Brittany. Weston had chosen the restaurant. He always chose places like that now. Places with menus that listed no prices and waiters who spoke in a hush. He had even changed his last name a few years back, traded McBride for Stevenson, because he said Stevenson sounded like a name that opened doors. I remember the day he told me. I remember nodding and saying nothing, the way I had learned to say nothing about so many things. My mother was happy that night. That is the part I keep returning to. She had put on her good blue cardigan, the one with the small pearl buttons, and she had asked Lainey 3 times whether her hair looked all right. She does not get out much anymore. Her mind drifts on some days, the way a radio drifts off a station, but her heart never drifts. She knows when she is loved, and she knows when she is not. And that knowledge has never once failed her. The trouble started small, the way trouble always does. Brittany complained about the table, then about the temperature, then about the wine. She ordered the most expensive things on the menu and pushed most of it around her plate untouched. Weston agreed with everything she said. He has a way of nodding now that costs him nothing and means nothing. A little tilt of the head he gives the world so the world will leave him alone. My mother reached for the bread basket, and her hand trembled the way it does, and she knocked over the small dish of butter. It was nothing. A spot of butter on white linen. I reached for my napkin to help her, but Brittany made a sound. A sharp little sound through her teeth, the kind you make at a child who has embarrassed you. She set down her fork with a deliberate click and looked at my mother, the way you look at a stain you intend to have removed. Lainey went still beside me. I felt it before I saw it, the way she stopped breathing for half a second. 30 years of marriage teaches you to read a person by the air around them. Brittany lifted her hand and turned her head, searching the room for the manager. She found him near the bar, a polished young man in a dark suit, and she raised 2 manicured fingers and beckoned him over, as though she owned the place, as though she owned all of us. The manager came. His name, I would learn later, was Rudy. He arrived with a practiced smile and his hands folded, ready to fix whatever small thing the rich woman wanted fixed. I want you to understand something about my mother Before I tell you what happened next, when I was 9 years old and sick with a fever that would not break, she sat awake beside my bed for 3 nights, pressing a cold cloth to my forehead and humming low until I slept. She never told me about those nights. I learned of them years later from a neighbor. That was the kind of mother she was, the kind who gave everything and asked for nothing, not even thanks. And now she sat in her good blue cardigan, with her hands folded in her lap, growing smaller by the second, as a young woman who had never sacrificed a single thing for anyone prepared to put her in her place. The whole table had gone quiet. Even Weston had stopped his nodding. My mother looked down at the spot of butter on the cloth, and her lips moved as if she wanted to apologize for something, though she had done nothing in this world that needed apologizing for. I watched my son look at his wife, then at his plate, then at the wall, anywhere but at the woman who had raised him, and I sat there, very still, my napkin still in my hand, watching the crack begin to spread across everything I thought my family was. Rudy looked from one face to the next, waiting for someone to tell him what was wrong. Brittany did not lower her voice. She never lowered her voice. She believed the world should hear her, and on that night, the world did. She pointed one finger at my mother, the way you point at something that needs to be carried out. "This one," she said, "is making a scene. She's spilling everything. She can't follow the conversation. And frankly, she's upsetting the other guests. I'd like you to move her to a separate table. Somewhere in the back." The word she used was this one, not her, not my grandmother. This one, as though my mother were an object that had wandered in from the street. Rudy hesitated. To his credit, he hesitated. His smile faltered, and his eyes flicked to me, then to Lainey, searching for an adult in the room who would stop this. I have thought about that look many times since. A stranger understood in 1 second what my own son could not understand in 36 years. But Brittany was not finished. She turned in her chair and looked at me, and then at Lainey. And something in her face curdled into open contempt. "And honestly," she said, "I don't know why we keep doing this. Him," she tipped her chin at me, "an old man who fixed machines his whole life, who still has dirt under his nails at the dinner table. And her." Her eyes slid to Lainey, a bedpan nurse from nowhere. "You people don't belong in a place like this. You embarrass us. Every time. People like you shouldn't show up in places like this." There it was. The sentence. "People like you shouldn't show up in places like this. I want you to remember it, because I would." I waited for my son to speak. This was the moment. This was the single moment when a man stands up, when he turns to the woman beside him and says, "That is my mother, and you will not speak to her that way. That is my father. That is the woman who raised me." I waited for Weston to be the man I had spent my life trying to raise. Weston looked at his mother. He looked at his grandmother, 89 years old in her good blue cardigan. Then he picked up his wine glass, took a slow sip, and gave Rudy a small, cowardly nod. "Move her," the nod said. "Do what my wife wants." I watched the light go out of my mother's face. She had spent an hour on her hair. She had asked 3 times if she looked all right. And now she understood, in the slow and terrible way the elderly understand cruelty. that she had been brought to this table only to be sent away from it. Her hands trembled in her lap. She did not cry. She was too proud to cry in front of them. And that pride broke something in me that no shouting ever could. Beside me, Lainey made a sound so quiet only I could hear it. 30 years of marriage. I knew exactly what it cost her to stay silent. And here is the strange thing. I felt the anger come, and then I felt it pass, the way a surge passes through a circuit before the breaker trips. Somewhere in those few seconds, I stopped being a heartbroken father. I became something colder and far more useful. I became an engineer again, looking at a structure that had failed. I have spent 40 years around things that break. I know that nothing breaks all at once. There is always a load it was never meant to carry. A stress applied again and again until the metal remembers the damage. I looked across that table at my son and his wife, at the cars they did not earn, and the name he had thrown away. And I saw a structure carrying a load it could not bear. I saw exactly where it would fail, because I was the one who had been holding it up all along. I did not say any of this. I set down my napkin. I stood, and I walked around the table to my mother, and I pulled out her chair the way you do for someone you love. "Come sit by me, Mom," I said. "You're at the head of the table tonight, right where you belong." She looked up at me, and for one moment the radio came back onto the station, and she knew exactly who I was and exactly what I had just done. "Thank you, Amos," she whispered. I settled her into the seat beside mine. I looked at Rudy and told him, quietly, that no one at this table would be moving anywhere. Then I told the table I needed a moment, and I excused myself toward the back of the restaurant. But I was not going to the restroom to lick my wounds, the way Weston surely assumed. As I walked across that carpeted floor, away from 36 years of patience, a blueprint was already drawing itself in my mind. Every line of it, every load-bearing point, every place where their borrowed lives would buckle and come down. By the time the door closed behind me, I had already begun. The hallway at the back of the restaurant was cooler and darker than the dining room, and for a moment, I just stood there and let the quiet settle over me. My heart was steady. That surprised me. A man learns things about himself in moments like these, and what I learned was that I was not shaking. I was calm in the way a machine is calm just before you throw the switch. I held my hands up to the dim light and looked at them. Brittany had called me an old man with dirt under his nails. She was not wrong about the nails. 40 years of work do not wash out, but she did not know what those hands had built, and she did not know what they could still take apart. Let me tell you who I really am, because Brittany never bothered to ask. I started on a factory floor when I was 19 years old, running a lathe for a man who paid me by the hour and never once learned my name. I worked doubles. I worked holidays. I married Lainey in a courthouse with $12 in my pocket, and she went straight from our wedding to a night shift at the county hospital because one of us had to. We did not have a honeymoon. We had a future, and we were both willing to bleed for it. For years, I tinkered after my shifts in a garage that smelled of oil and cold coffee. I was trying to solve a small problem that nobody important cared about. There was a valve, a little pressure relief valve used in medical pumps and ventilators, that failed in a particular way under stress. And when it failed, people in hospital beds were the ones who paid for it. I had watched it happen. Lainey had come home from her shifts with stories that kept me up at night. So I built a better one. It took me 6 years and more failures than I can count. But I built a valve that did not fail the way the old one did. I patented it. Just me, Amos McBride, on a single sheet of paper that I still keep in a fireproof box in my closet. That patent is the only truly valuable thing I have ever owned. The royalties from it are modest, but they are honest. And they were always meant for 2 things: to care for my mother in her last years, and to keep a roof over Lainey and me when I could no longer work. When Weston came to me 4 years ago and said he wanted to run a small company built around the valve, to license it and grow it, I said yes. Lainey asked me to give him a chance, and I have never been able to deny that woman anything. So I let him sit in the chair with the title on the door. I let him be the director, the face, the man in the suit. But I want to be very clear about one thing, because it matters more than anything else in this story. I never gave him the patent. The patent stayed in my name. He ran the company. I owned the foundation it was built on. He just never bothered to read the documents closely enough to understand that. The same way he never bothered to read his own grandmother's face. That was the load-bearing point. That was the place where everything they had built sat balanced on something that belonged entirely to me. I stood in that hallway and thought about my mother in her blue cardigan, the radio of her mind drifting in and out, still proud enough not to cry. I thought about Lainey going still beside me, swallowing 30 years of grief in a single breath. And I thought about my son, taking a slow sip of wine and nodding a stranger toward the back of the room. People assume that a quiet man is a weak man. They assume that patience is the same thing as permission. For 36 years I had been patient with my son, hoping he would become someone his grandmother could be proud of. That night, in that cold hallway, I finally understood that the boy I had been waiting for was gone. He had not been delayed. He had been replaced, slowly, by a man I did not know and did not respect. I felt no grief over it, which frightened me more than grief would have. I felt the way I used to feel when I finally diagnosed a fault I had been chasing for weeks. Not anger, just clarity, just the cold satisfaction of knowing, at last, exactly what was wrong and exactly how to fix it. I reached into my jacket and took out my phone. The screen lit my face in the dark. There was only one person I needed to call, a man who had stood beside me for 30 years, and who, like me, did not believe in raising his voice when a signature would do far more damage. I scrolled to his name and pressed it. Thaddeus Estes, my lawyer, my oldest friend. The man who kept every contract I had ever signed in perfect order, the way I kept every blueprint. The line rang twice. Then his low, dry voice came through, the voice of a man who was never surprised by anything. "Amos," he said, "it's Thanksgiving. Tell me what's wrong." I told him I was ready, and I asked him to pull the file. "Pull the file," I said again. "All of it. The company accounts, the license payments, the care fund. I want to see everything tonight." There was a pause on the line. I could hear Thaddeus set down whatever he had been holding. A fork, a glass, the ordinary sounds of a man's holiday. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. It had gone flat and careful. The voice he used in courtrooms. "Amos," he said, "how much do you already know?" That was the question that told me everything. Thaddeus Estes has been my friend for 30 years. He does not ask a question like that unless he already has the answer and is afraid to be the one to say it first. I leaned against the cool wall of that hallway and closed my eyes. "Tell me what you found," I said. He told me he had been uneasy for months. Small things at first. The license payments from the company had been arriving late, then arriving short, then arriving with explanations that did not add up. Weston had told me the business was simply going through a slow quarter. I had believed him, the way you believe a son even when the numbers in front of you whisper otherwise. I am an engineer. I trust data over feelings in every part of my life except one. My boy. That was the single place I let my heart overrule the figures. And that was exactly the blind spot he had used. "It isn't a slow quarter," Thaddeus said. "Amos, the money isn't slow, it's gone. And it isn't only the company's money." I opened my eyes. "Say it plainly." "There are withdrawals from your mother's long-term care fund," he said. 3 of them. Over the past 8 months, large ones. They were authorized under your name, but you never authorized them. I checked your calendar against the dates. You were with me on 2 of those days. I did not speak. In the dining room, somewhere behind me, I could hear the soft clink of silverware and the low hum of strangers enjoying their holiday. None of them knowing that a man was standing in their back hallway, watching his family come apart with the cold precision of a fault diagnosis. My mother's care fund, the money I had set aside, dollar by honest dollar, from 40 years of work and 1 good patent, so that the woman who raised me would never spend her last years frightened about money, the way she had spent her first 60. That fund was not wealth. It was a promise. It was the one thing in this world I had sworn to protect. And it had been bleeding out for 8 months, while I sat across the table from the man who opened the wound. "There's more," Thaddeus said quietly. "I haven't confirmed all of it yet, but there are documents I don't like. Something touching your house, and a transfer request involving the patent itself. I need another day to be sure before I put words to it. The house, the patent, the 2 pillars that held up everything Laney and I had left. He was not content to drain my mother. He was reaching for the roof over our heads, and the one thing I had ever invented. He wanted all 3. He wanted to take from every generation at once, the grandmother, the parents, the future, and feed it all into the bottomless appetite of the woman who had just called my mother this one. "Do you want me to wait until Monday?" Thaddeus asked. He knew the answer. He asked anyway, because he is a careful man, and careful men confirm the obvious. "No," I said. "Start tonight. Freeze what you can freeze. Lock what you can lock. The corporate cards, the company accounts, everything that runs through the entity. Do it quietly, and do it now." And Weston, I thought about my son taking that slow sip of wine. I thought about the nod he gave a stranger, sending his grandmother to the back of the room. For 36 years I had been waiting for him to become a man. I understood, finally, that I had been waiting for someone who no longer existed. "The boy I raised is gone. Thaddeus," I said. "I don't know who that is sitting at my table, but he is not my son anymore. He is a problem I should have solved years ago. Treat it that way." Thaddeus was silent for a moment. Then he said, in the voice of a friend rather than a lawyer, "I'm sorry, Amos. I truly am. So am I said. And I meant it. There is a grief in being right about the worst thing. I told him I would call in the morning. I told him to send me everything he had to my tablet before midnight. Then I ended the call and stood alone in that dim hallway, slipping the phone back into my jacket. I want to tell you that I felt rage. People expect rage. But what I felt was the deep, settled calm of a man who has finally located the crack and now knows precisely where to apply the load. The anger had burned off in the first 30 seconds at the table. What was left was colder and far more dangerous. I straightened my jacket. I smoothed my tie. And then I walked back toward the dining room, toward the table where they were laughing again, because I had a plan now. And the first piece of it was already in motion behind a polished young manager named Rudy. When I came back to the table, they were laughing. That is the detail I will never forget. While a stranger had been freezing their accounts in the dark, while my mother sat with the light gone out of her eyes, my son and his wife were laughing about something on Brittany's phone, their heads bent close together like two children sharing a secret. They did not even look up when I sat down. I took my seat beside my mother. I covered her small, trembling hand with mine, and I felt her fingers tighten around mine the way a frightened child holds on in the dark. I gave her a steady look and a small nod, the kind that says, without words, I have you. You are safe. She did not understand what was coming. She only understood that her son had come back, and that was enough to bring a little color into her face. Lainey watched me from across the table. 30 years of marriage. She knew that something had changed in me out in that hallway. She did not know what, but she trusted me, and she said nothing. She simply folded her hands and waited, the way she had waited through 1,000 night shifts for the morning to come. Rudy returned with the check. He set the black leather folio in the center of the table, and I watched Weston reach for it the way a man reaches for a stage. This was theater to him. He wanted an audience. He wanted me to see him pay, to see him be the big man, the provider, the one who picked up the tab at the expensive restaurant while his grease-stained father looked on. He flipped the folio open without glancing at the total, because men like Weston never look at totals. The total is somebody else's problem. It always had been mine. I reached into my jacket and took out my wallet, the same worn leather wallet I have carried for 20 years. I counted out enough cash to cover my meal and my mother's, plus a generous tip, and I laid the bills quietly on the table beside the folio. I told Rudy, in a low voice, that this was for the two of us, for Regina and for me. Nothing more. Weston scoffed. He actually scoffed, leaning back in his chair, shaking his head at me with a look of pity, as if my handful of cash were a sad little gesture from a man who did not understand how money worked anymore. Dad, he said, drawing the word out, making it small. Put your cash away. You're embarrassing yourself. I've got this. I always have this. He reached into his designer jacket and pulled out the company card. The corporate card, heavy and dark, with the name of the company printed across it. The company built on my valve, my patent, my 40 years. He held it up for a moment so the table could see it catch the light. Then he tossed it onto the folio with a flick of his wrist. A little clatter of plastic on leather meant to announce his power over all of us. Put the rest on that, he told Rudy, not even looking at him, and bring us the dessert menu, the good one. Brittany smiled. She set down her phone and looked at me with that same curdled contempt from before. Pleased. Certain she had watched the old man be put back in his place. She leaned toward Laney and began talking, loudly, about a trip they were planning. A winter villa somewhere warm, describing the private pool and the staff and the view, twisting each detail like a small knife, making sure my wife understood that this was a world we would never be invited into. I said nothing. I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip. I looked at my son's company card sitting on that black folio, and I felt something close to peace, because I knew what Rudy would find when he walked that card to the terminal. I knew that the screen would not approve it. I knew it would not be a polite decline for insufficient funds, the kind a man can laugh off and cover with another card. The order Thaddeus had put through an hour ago was not a suspension. It was a lockdown. The account behind that card no longer existed in any way that mattered. The card was a dead thing, a piece of plastic with a name on it, and nothing behind it at all. Rudy picked up the folio. He picked up Weston's card with 2 fingers, and he picked up my cash, separately, and gave me the smallest nod of acknowledgement. A nod that said he understood that the 2 payments were not the same and were never meant to be. He turned and walked toward the back of the restaurant, toward the terminal, his polished shoes silent on the carpet. Weston leaned back, satisfied, and reached for his wine. Brittany kept describing her villa. My mother held my hand. Laney watched me, and I waited. The way I have waited my whole life for a stressed part to finally give. For the moment the card came back, and the first piece of their borrowed world came down. It did not take long. Rudy came back faster than a man brings good news. He arrived at the table without the dessert menu, without the folio open for a signature, without any of the small ceremonies that follow a paid bill. He stood beside Weston and bent slightly at the waist, lowering his voice the way a professional does when he is trying to spare someone a scene. But the dining room was quiet enough that the nearest tables heard every word. And I think, looking back, that Rudy knew they would. "Sir," he said, "I'm very sorry. The card was declined. The bank flagged the account. I'm afraid I can't run it." Weston laughed. It was a short, ugly laugh. The laugh of a man who has never once in his life been told no by a machine. "That's impossible," he said. "Run it again. It's a corporate account. There's no limit on it. Run it again." I did run it twice. "Sir," Rudy said, "it's not a limit issue. The account has been locked." I watched the word locked land on my son's face. For just a moment, he did not understand it. Then I watched understanding begin to arrive, slow and cold, and I watched him turn his head toward me, searching my face for an answer. I gave him nothing. I gave him the same blank, patient look I would give a faulty gauge, a thing that has stopped telling the truth and now must simply be replaced. Brittany's smile was gone. The villa, the private pool, the staff, all of it had evaporated from her face in an instant. She snatched her purse off the back of her chair, a purse that cost more than my mother's care fund paid out in a month, and she began digging through it with the frantic motion of someone who has dropped something precious down a drain. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "Here, use mine." She pulled out a card, a shiny personal card, and shoved it at Rudy without looking at him. Rudy had come prepared this time. He drew a small wireless terminal from inside his jacket and slid her card through it right there at the table, in front of everyone. The machine thought for a moment. Then it gave a short, flat beep. "I'm sorry," Rudy said. "That one's declined as well." Brittany's face went red. She yanked the card back and pushed a second one at him. A different bank, a different color. Rudy slid it. The same pause, the same flat beep. "Declined," he said quietly. By now the nearby tables had stopped pretending not to watch. Forks rested on plates. A hush spread outward from us like a ripple. Brittany's hands were shaking as she dug for a third card. And I knew, without being told, that this was the bottom of the barrel. The emergency card with the cruel interest rate. The last thread holding up the whole pretend kingdom. Rudy slid the third card. The machine paused. The beep came. "I'm very sorry," he said. All three were declined by the issuing banks. There it was, laid bare on a white tablecloth in front of strangers. 3 cards, 3 declines. Behind the designer purse and the tailored suit and the talk of warm villas. There was nothing, no savings, no safety net, not even the cost of one dinner. They had spent their whole marriage looking rich, and the looking had cost everything. And now the bill had come due in the most public way a bill can come. My mother did not understand the details, but she understood the shape of it. She looked at me, and a small, uncertain question crossed her face. I patted her hand. "It's all right, Mom," I told her softly. "Ours is already paid. We don't owe anyone a thing." And we did not. My cash sat folded on the table, settled and clean, covering Regina and me, and not 1 cent more. That was the whole architecture of it. I had paid for the woman who raised me. I had not paid for the people who threw her away. Weston stared at the 3 dead cards on the table as if he could will them back to life. His confidence had drained out of him so completely that he looked younger suddenly, almost like the boy I used to know. And for one foolish second, my old heart ached for him. Then I remembered the care fund. I remembered the withdrawals signed in my name on days I had spent sitting beside Thaddeus. And the ache closed over like water over a stone. "Dad," Weston said, and his voice had changed. The performance was gone. What was left was thin and frightened. "Dad, what did you do?" I did not answer him. There was no answer that would help him. And I was not in the business of helping him anymore. Rudy straightened up. But he did not leave. He stood there a moment longer, and something in his posture shifted, became more formal, more careful, and I understood that the matter of the dead cards was not the last thing he had come to say. "Sir," he said to Weston, "there's one more thing. When the bank flagged the account, they left a message on the terminal for the merchant. I'm required to pass it along." He paused, and whatever he said next drained the last of the blood from my son's face. "The bank's message," Rudy said carefully, "was that the account has been flagged for review by their fraud department. They've asked that the card be retained. I'm sorry, sir. I'm not permitted to return it to you." Fraud department. 2 words, spoken softly into a quiet dining room, and I watched them go through my son like a current. He opened his mouth and nothing came out. Brittany grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his sleeve, hissing something I could not hear and did not need to. The strangers at the next table had given up all pretense and were watching openly now. I did not stay to enjoy it. There is a kind of man who would have leaned back and savored every second. I am not that man. And besides, the woman who raised me was sitting beside me, tired and confused, and far past the hour she usually went to bed. I stood. I helped my mother to her feet, steadying her with one hand under her elbow, the way I have learned to do, and I draped her coat over her thin shoulders. I held out my other hand to Lainey, and she took it and rose without a word. We left the cash on the table, settled and clean, and we walked out past the staring tables and through the heavy front doors into the cold November night. And I did not look back at my son even once. The night air was sharp and good in my lungs. My mother shivered, and I pulled her closer, and the three of us made our slow way to the car. For the first 10 minutes of the drive, no one spoke. My mother fell asleep almost at once in the back seat, the way the very old and the very young do. Her head tipped against the window, her breathing soft and even. The street lights slid across the windshield. I kept my hands on the wheel and my eyes on the road, and let the silence hold us. Then Lainey began to cry. It was not loud. Lainey is not a loud woman. It was the quiet, broken weeping of someone whose heart has finally given way after holding firm for hours. She cried with her hand pressed over her mouth so she would not wake Regina. She cried for the boy she used to rock to sleep, the boy whose fevers she had nursed and whose scraped knees she had bandaged, the boy who had just sat in a restaurant and let a stranger send his grandmother to the back of the room. I did not tell her it would be all right. I have never lied to that woman, and I was not going to start with the cruelest lie of all. I reached over and rested my hand on hers, and I let her cry, because she needed to mourn, and a man should never rush a good woman through her grief. When her tears began to slow, I did not drive us home. Instead, I turned off the main road and pulled into a quiet overlook on the hill above the city, a place Lainey and I used to come to when we were young and could not afford anywhere else. I put the car in park. Below us, the city lay spread out in its grid of lights, and somewhere down there, my son sat trapped at a table with a debt he could not pay. Lainey wiped her eyes and looked at me. "Amos," she said, her voice raw. "Where did we go wrong? How did our boy become this?" I turned in my seat to face her. "We didn't go wrong," I said. "Weston made his own choices. And what you saw tonight, Lainey, that was only the part they let us see. There's more. There's a great deal more. And you need to hear it from me before you hear it from anyone else." She went still. I told her that I had not frozen those cards because of a spilled dish of butter or a cruel word over dinner. I told her that dinner was only the last thing, the final confirmation of something I had begun to suspect months ago. I told her that Thaddeus had been quietly going through the numbers, and that what he found was not a slow quarter or a missed payment. I reached into the back, careful not to wake my mother, and pulled my leather case onto my lap. Inside was my tablet, and on the tablet was the file Thaddeus had sent before midnight, encrypted, every page of it. I had read it once already, in the hallway, standing very still. I had not wept. I had simply understood. "Do you remember the care fund?" I asked her. "Your mother's. My mother's. The money I set aside for Regina's last years." Lainey nodded slowly. She knew that fund. She knew what it meant to me, because she was the one who had sat with me the night I opened it. The two of us promising each other that Regina would never be afraid about money again. It's been emptied, I said, over the last 8 months, withdrawn 3 times, under my name, on days I was nowhere near a bank. Her hand found mine in the dark and gripped it hard. There's more than that, I said. And I think you should see it for yourself. I woke the tablet. The screen lit our faces with a pale blue glow, and outside the city went on glittering, indifferent, as I turned it toward my wife and opened the first page. The first page was the care fund. I let Lainey read it herself, because some truths a person has to see in their own hands to believe. She read the 3 withdrawal dates. She read the amounts. She read my name on the authorization line, signed in an ink I had never touched. Her finger traced the signature, and her brow drew down in confusion. Then, in something harder, "That's your name," she said. "But that's not your hand. I'd know your hand anywhere." "It isn't my hand," I said. "It's a copy of it. A good one. Someone who has seen my signature many times, on many documents. Someone I trusted to help me organize my papers last spring. She understood at once who I meant. We had let Weston into the study last spring to help us sort the files, to make himself useful, to play at being a son. He had sat at my desk for 2 days, with every document I owned spread out in front of him. I had thought, at the time, how good it was to have him close. He had been studying, not helping. Studying the shape of my name and the layout of my life. Deciding which parts of it he could take. I swiped to the next page. "This is the house," I said. Lainey read it twice. I watched her read it twice. It was a loan document, a lien against the home we had bought 30 years ago and paid off dollar by dollar. The house where we had raised our son. The house where I had promised her she would never have to worry about a roof again. The loan had been taken out 4 months ago. The signature on it was hers, and she had never seen it before in her life. "He forged me too," she said. Her voice had gone very quiet. "He forged my name to borrow against our house." "He did." I swiped again. To the last page. The one I had read 3 times in that hallway and still could hardly bear. "And this," I said, "is the patent." It was a transfer request. A set of papers. Prepared and waiting. That would have moved ownership of my valve. The one good thing I built in 40 years. Out of my name and into the company Weston controlled, where he could then sell it, license it, hand it to whatever buyer Brittany's appetite required. He had not finished this one. Thaddeus had caught it in time, but the intent was there, drawn up and ready. Only my own signature still missing because he had not yet found the right moment to forge it. Lainey set the tablet down on her lap. For a long moment she said nothing. Outside, the city went on glittering, and in the back seat my mother slept on, unaware that the man she called her grandson had drained the fund meant to keep her safe. "All of it," Lainey said at last. "He took from your mother. He took from us. He tried to take the one thing you ever made." She turned to look at me, and the tears were gone from her eyes. Something else had taken their place. Something cold and clear and absolutely steady. "And he did it to buy that woman her villas and her purses and her warm winter pool." "Yes," I said. I had braced myself for her to break. I had braced myself to hold her while she wept for the 2nd time that night. But Lainey did not break. I watched a transformation come over my wife that I will remember until the day I die. The soft, grieving mother who had cried in the dark an hour ago was gone. And in her place sat a woman who had just learned she had been robbed by the child she sacrificed everything to raise. She did not ask me how he could do it. She did not ask whether Brittany had made him do it, or whether we might still save him, or whether therapy or a serious talk or a little more love might bring our boy back. A forged signature is not a mistake made in a moment of weakness. It is a careful thing. It takes planning and patience and a steady hand. It is a decision made coldly, again and again, across 8 months and 3 generations. When she finally spoke, her voice did not shake. "When we get home," she said, "we are calling the police tonight. I want it on record. He forged my name and your name, and he stole from a dying woman's care. And I will not let him walk away from that, because he is ours." I looked at my wife in the pale light of the screen, and I felt something I had not expected to feel that night. Pride. Fierce, aching pride. For 30 years, she had been the gentlest person I knew. Now, when it mattered most, she had turned to steel without a single backward glance. She reached over and closed her hand around mine. "Hard. So tell me, Amos," she said. "What's the plan? Tell me everything, and tell me what I can do." The grieving mother was gone. What sat beside me now was an ally. And there is no force on this earth more dangerous than a good woman who has finally run out of forgiveness. I did not sleep that night, and I did not need to. There is a kind of tiredness that sleep cannot touch, and there is a kind of purpose that makes sleep seem like a waste of good hours. I sat at my desk until the sky went gray, reading every line of every document, the way I once read every line of a failing schematic, until I found the one connection that was wrong. By 6 in the morning, I had a plan laid out the way I lay out a build, step by step. No skipped fasteners, no guesswork. Lainey made coffee, and we drank it standing at the kitchen counter, not talking much, the way you do before hard work. My mother was still asleep down the hall, safe under our roof, the roof Weston had tried to borrow against without my wife's knowledge. I looked in on her once. She slept with her hands folded under her cheek, the way a child sleeps. And I made her a promise in the doorway that I did not say out loud. Then I drove to the company. It is a small place, the company that bears my valve. 2 floors of a leased building near the medical district, a handful of engineers, a modest assembly room. Weston liked to call it his headquarters, and he had filled the front office with the trappings of a man who wanted to look larger than he was. A glass desk, a wall of awards he had purchased rather than earned, a coffee machine that cost more than the men who worked there made in a week. But the real work, the work that mattered, happened in the back, where honest people built honest things around an idea I had given them. Thaddeus met me in the lobby at 8 o'clock sharp. He had a thick folder under one arm and the calm, grim look of a man who had been up as late as I had. Beside him stood a younger man in a gray suit, an officer of the licensing authority, there to witness and record. And there was one more person I had asked Thaddeus to bring, a notary, because everything we did that morning was going to be clean, lawful, and impossible to undo. "Walk me through it," I said. Thaddeus opened the folder. "It's simpler than Weston ever understood," he said. "He runs the company. He signs the leases. He hires the staff. He plays the director. But the company doesn't own the patent. You do. It only licenses the right to use it. And that license has terms. Terms he violated the moment he committed fraud against the patent holder. That's you. He laid the papers on the lobby table one by one. A notice of license termination, a revocation of Weston's signing authority, a formal transfer of control back to me, the patent holder, the man whose name had been on that single fireproof sheet for 30 years. Sign here, Thaddeus said, and here, and the company is yours again. Everything he built on top of your valve comes back to the foundation. And the foundation was always you. I signed my own hand, my own name, in ink I had every right to use. It did not take long. The most important things rarely do. In the space of a few minutes, with a few honest signatures, I took back everything my son had been pretending to own. Thaddeus went to change the locks on the director's office and to inform the staff, gently, that there had been a change in leadership. I stood for a moment in that bright lobby, looking at the wall of purchased awards, and I felt no triumph, only the quiet of a thing set right. That was when a voice spoke behind me, hesitant and low. "Mr. McBride." I turned. A young man stood there, perhaps 28, in clothes that had been pressed by someone who could not afford to ruin them. I recognized him. He was one of the engineers from the back, one of the people who did the real work. His name was Javier Carrillo. I had spoken to him only a few times, but I remembered him, because he had asked me once, with genuine hunger, how the valve actually worked. And I had spent an hour drawing it for him on a napkin while he listened like it was scripture. "Javier," I said, "good morning." He glanced toward the back, then toward the door, the way a man glances when he is about to do something brave and is afraid of being seen doing it. "Sir," he said quietly, "I heard there's a change happening, with the company, with Weston." He swallowed. "I've been wanting to talk to someone for a while now. Someone I could trust, but I didn't know who. And then I heard you were here." He held a small flash drive in his hand, gripping it so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. "There's something you need to see," he said. "Something I've been keeping. And I think, once you see it, you're going to understand that what your son did with the money is not the worst thing he did." I took Javier into the back, to a small conference room where the engineers ate their lunches, and I closed the door. He sat across from me and set the flash drive on the table between us, as though it weighed a great deal more than it did. "Take your time," I told him. He took a breath. "About a year ago," he said, "Weston started pushing us to certify a new batch of the valves faster. Much faster. The testing protocol takes weeks. We stress every unit. We log every failure. We throw out anything that doesn't hold. That's the whole point of your design, Mr. McBride. It doesn't fail the way the old ones did, but only if it's tested honestly." I felt something cold begin to gather in my chest. He didn't want to wait for the tests, Javier said. There was a big distribution contract on the line, and he wanted the numbers to look perfect so the buyer would sign. So he told us to certify units that hadn't completed the full protocol. And when one of the senior people refused, Weston had the test data altered, the failure logs. He had someone change the numbers, so the failed units read as passed. The room was very quiet. Out beyond the door, I could hear the ordinary morning sounds of the shop. A drill, a low conversation. Men doing honest work. "These valves go into ventilators," I said, "into pumps, into machines that breathe for people who can't breathe for themselves. Yes, sir, Javier's voice cracked. That's why I kept the originals. Every real test log, every email where he gave the order. I didn't know what to do with them. I have a family. I needed the job. But I couldn't let it go either, because I kept thinking about who's on the other end of those valves. So I copied everything and I waited. I'm sorry it took me this long. I reached across the table and put my hand over his, the way I had put my hand over my mother's the night before. You did the right thing. Son, I said. And I meant the word son in a way I had not meant it about Weston in a long time. You did the bravest thing a person can do. You're not sorry it took this long. You're the only one in this building who didn't look away. I had thought, the night before, that the care fund was the bottom of it. Then I had seen the house and the patent and thought that was the bottom. I had been wrong each time. This was the bottom. My son had not only stolen from his grandmother and his parents. He had been willing to send faulty valves into hospitals, to let strangers in their worst hour breathe through a part he knew might fail. Also, a contract would close, and the money would flow, and Brittany would have her warm winter pool. That was not a family matter anymore. That was a crime against people who would never know his name. I called Thaddeus into the room and had Javier tell it again, every word, while Thaddeus recorded it and made his careful notes. Then Thaddeus made a call of his own to a financial and medical fraud investigator he trusted, a sharp, unsmiling woman named Tatum Bryant. That afternoon, Lainey met us downtown. She had dressed carefully, the way she used to dress for a difficult shift, and she carried a folder of her own, the forged loan against our house, printed and tabbed. She sat across from Tatum Bryant in a cold, gray room and signed a sworn statement, her voice steady the whole way through. She did not waver once. She described the forged signature, the emptied care fund, the loan she had never taken. When Tatum asked, gently, whether she understood that this would mean criminal charges against her own son, Lainey looked her in the eye. He understood what he was doing when he forged my name, she said. I understand what I'm doing now. I had never loved her more than in that moment. We drove home in the early dark, for the first time in 2 days. Something like peace sat between us in the car. Not happiness. Peace. The peace of people who have stopped waiting and started acting. It did not last the evening. Thaddeus called just as we pulled into the driveway. His voice had that flat, careful tone again, the one that meant trouble. Amos, he said. They've made a move. Weston and Brittany. They've hired a lawyer. One of those late-night billboard types. And they're not playing defense. They're suing you. Wrongful termination, breach of contract, the works. And they've gone to the press. There's a local reporter scheduled to interview them on the courthouse steps tomorrow morning. They're going to call you a tyrant who stole his son's company. I sat in the dark of the car with the engine ticking as it cooled, and I didn't feel fear. I felt the small, grim satisfaction of an engineer who has just watched a careless man pick up the one tool guaranteed to take off his own hand. Let them, I said. Let them file every word of it. The interview aired the next morning. Lainey and I watched it together at the kitchen table, my mother still asleep down the hall. There was Weston on the courthouse steps in a wrinkled, carefully wrinkled suit, his hair mussed just enough to look like a man who had not slept. Beside him stood Brittany, transformed. The woman who had pointed at my mother and said this one now leaned her head on her husband's shoulder and dabbed at dry eyes with a tissue. They had rehearsed it. You could see the rehearsal in every gesture. Weston looked into the camera and called me a cruel, jealous old man. He said he had built a thriving medical company with his own 2 hands, and that his bitter father had stolen it from him the moment it became successful. He said I had cut him off out of spite, that I could not bear to see my son surpass me, Brittany added in a small, brave voice, that my cruelty had broken her heart and ruined their marriage. It was a good performance. I will give them that. To a stranger watching over breakfast, it was the story of a tyrant and his victim. It did some damage. 2 of the buyers who licensed the valve called Thaddeus that morning, nervous about the headlines, asking what was going on. A small company lives and dies on trust. And for a few hours that trust wobbled. Thaddeus handled the calls in his flat, unhurried voice and told them only that the truth would be in the public record very soon, and that they would want to wait for it. I was not worried. A lie travels fast, but it travels light, and it has nothing underneath it to hold the weight when the truth finally arrives. Brittany called the house a little after 10. She did not call me. She called Lainey. That was her mistake, though she did not know it yet. In her mind, Lainey was still the soft woman who had wept in a restaurant, the gentle grandmother whose love for her son could be squeezed like a lever. Brittany believed she could frighten Lainey into begging me to stop. Lainey put the phone on speaker and set it on the table between us, and she looked at me, calm as still water, and answered. Brittany did not say hello. She went straight to the knife. She told Lainey that my behavior was abusive and unforgivable. She told her to make me stop, to make me drop the lawsuit and reopen the accounts and give Weston back his company. And then she played the card she believed would break any mother in the world. If you let him keep doing this, Brittany said, her voice going low and cruel, you will never see Weston again. And let me be very clear, you will never meet your grandchildren. Not ever. You'll die a lonely old woman who never got to hold them. Is that what you want? For 3 years, that threat had been Brittany's favorite weapon. The vague, dangling promise of grandchildren she had no intention of ever providing, held over my wife's head to keep her obedient. She waited now for the gasp, the tears, the surrender. The line was silent for a moment. Lainey took a slow sip of her coffee. She looked at me, and the corner of her mouth lifted. Not in cruelty, but in something close to relief. The relief of a woman finally free of a leash she had worn too long. Brittany, Lainey said, and her voice was so steady it seemed to lower the temperature of the room. I want you to hear me clearly. I would not let a child of mine anywhere near the 2 of you. If you ever did have children, the kindest thing that could happen to them would be to never know you existed. So you can keep your threat. It was the only thing holding me in this family. And you've just set me free of it. I heard Brittany's breath catch on the other end. And one more thing. Lainey went on, gentle as a knife laid on a table. I drove downtown yesterday and signed a sworn statement with a fraud investigator named Tatum Bryant about the loan Weston forged against our house, about the money he stole from his grandmother. It's already filed. So you may want to spend less time threatening me and more time speaking with a lawyer. A real one this time. Then Lainey reached out and ended the call. She did not wait for a reply. She set the phone face down on the table and picked her coffee back up. And her hand did not shake at all. That afternoon, Thaddeus came by the house with the lawsuit papers in hand, and he was almost smiling, which for Thaddeus is the equivalent of another man laughing out loud. "Amos," he said, spreading the documents on my kitchen table. "Do you understand what they've done by suing you? They've opened the door. A lawsuit means discovery. It means we get to subpoena records. It means everything Weston tried to hide, the fraud, the forged signatures, the altered test data, all of it can be put in front of a judge, legally, on the record, under oath." He tapped the papers. "They think this lawsuit is their weapon," he said. "It's the rope, and they've handed us both ends of it." The courthouse was an old building of gray stone and tall windows, the kind of place built long ago to remind a person how small he is before the law. I wore my good dark suit, the one I keep for funerals and weddings, and I knotted my tie carefully in the mirror that morning while Lainey watched from the doorway. My hands were steady. They are always steady. 40 years bent over a workbench, fitting one small part against another, will teach a man's hands to stop shaking for good. Lainey came with me. So did Thaddeus, carrying a single thick black binder under his arm and nothing else. No cart of boxes, no team of young associates in matching suits, just the one binder and his flat. Patient calm. The calm of a man who has already read the last page of a story everyone else thinks is still being written. My mother stayed home with a kind neighbor named Marley, because a courtroom is no place for her, and because what was about to happen there was not meant for her gentle ears. We took our seats at the defense table. Across the aisle, Weston and Brittany had arrived early to claim their ground. They were dressed for the cameras, Weston in a sharp navy suit, Brittany in something tasteful and restrained. Her grief carefully reapplied for the occasion, like a fresh coat of paint over rust. Beside them sat their lawyer, a man named Silas Stanton, the late-night billboard attorney they had scraped together when no real firm would take them. He had the eager, hungry look of a man who smells a settlement and has already spent it in his head. Weston caught my eye across the aisle, and he smirked. That smirk told me everything about how badly he had misjudged this. He thought he held the winning hand. He thought the bad press and the wobble in the buyer's confidence had backed me into a corner, and that I would walk in with a checkbook and a bowed head, ready to pay whatever it cost to make the embarrassment disappear. He thought I had come to surrender. He had spent his whole life mistaking my patience for weakness, and he was about to make that mistake one final time. The bailiff called us to rise, and Judge Kaylani Russell came in. She was not what Weston was hoping for. I saw his lawyer's face fall a little as she took the bench. She was a stern woman with iron gray hair pulled back tight, and reading glasses she did not yet bother to put on. And she looked out over the room with the weary, unimpressed expression of a judge who has heard 1,000 family squabbles over money and expects this to be the 1,001st. She had no patience for theater. You could feel it like cold air off a window. She glanced at the docket, rubbed the bridge of her nose, and instructed the plaintiff's attorney to make his case for the emergency injunction. Silas Stanton practically leapt to his feet. He did not present facts. He presented a performance. He spoke of my son, the brilliant young entrepreneur, the visionary who had built a medical company from nothing, only to have it ripped from his hands by a jealous, controlling father who could not bear to be surpassed. He gestured at Weston, who managed to look wounded right on cue, like an actor hitting his mark. He spoke of the cruel, public lockout, the frozen accounts, the heartbreak of a young couple cast out by a bitter old man. He asked the court to freeze my assets, to reinstate Weston's salary and authority, and to force me to hand the company back until a full trial could be held. He spoke for 10 minutes. He waved his arms. He invoked the news coverage as though a reporter's microphone were a form of evidence. He painted me, brushstroke by brushstroke, as the villain of a story he had never once bothered to learn the truth of. When he finished, he sat down looking enormously pleased with himself. Weston leaned over and whispered something to Brittany that made her allow herself the smallest smile. They both looked across the aisle at me, waiting for Thaddeus to stand and ask the judge for a recess, for a quiet word in the hallway, for the surrender they were certain was already on its way. Judge Russell turned to our table. "Counsel for the defense," she said, in a tone that promised she expected more of the same nonsense. "Your response, and make it brief." Thaddeus stood. He did not ask for a recess. He did not look nervous, and he did not shuffle his papers, and he did not glance once at the smug faces across the aisle. He buttoned his jacket with one hand, picked up the single thick black binder with the other, and walked, unhurried, to the center of the room. "Your Honor," he said, in a voice as flat and certain as a level laid across a beam. "The plaintiff is not the victim of a wrongful termination. The plaintiff is the perpetrator of a crime. Several crimes, in fact. And with the court's permission, I will show you exactly what kind." Across the aisle, Silas Stanton's smile began, very slowly, to slip. Weston's smirk held a moment longer, the way a steel beam holds for one last second after the bolt inside it has already sheared clean through. Thaddeus set the binder down on the table before the bench, looked up at the judge, and opened it. Thaddeus did not raise his voice. He never does. He simply began to lay the truth on the record, one page at a time, the way a man sets bricks. "Your Honor," he said, "the plaintiff claims he is a wrongfully terminated employee. He was never an employee. He held a director's title at a company that licenses a single patent. That patent has belonged, for 30 years, to the defendant, Amos McBride, the man who invented it. The company holds a license, nothing more. And that license was lawfully terminated, with notice, by its rightful owner." He handed the first set of documents to the bailiff, who carried them up to the bench. Judge Russell took them without expression and began to read. Now, as to why it was terminated. Thaddeus continued. "These are bank records from a long-term care fund established by Mr. McBride for his 89-year-old mother. Over 8 months, more than $70,000 was withdrawn from that fund. Each withdrawal was authorized under Amos McBride's signature. Mr. McBride did not make a single one of them. We have his calendar, corroborated by my own records, placing him elsewhere on each date. The signatures are forgeries." A murmur moved through the courtroom. I watched Silas Stanton lean over and whisper urgently to Weston, who had gone very still. "This," Thaddeus said, handing up the next file, "is a loan taken against the McBride family home. $200,000. The signature is that of Lainey Maldonado, the defendant's wife. She has filed a sworn statement, already on record with the Financial Crimes Division, attesting that she never signed it and never saw it. Another forgery. He turned a page in his binder. And this is a transfer request, prepared, but not yet executed. That would have moved ownership of the patent itself out of Mr. McBride's name and into the company the plaintiff controlled, where it could be sold. The plaintiff did not steal only from his grandmother and his parents, Your Honor. He attempted to steal the one thing his father ever invented. Judge Russell looked up over the top of her reading glasses. She had put them on now. Her weary expression was entirely gone. What had replaced it was something cold and very focused. "Counsel," she said to Silas Stanton, "did you review these matters before filing this suit?" Stanton rose halfway, his mouth working. "Your Honor, these are unverified accusations, slanderous in nature, and I object to—" "Sit down," she said, not loudly. She did not need to be loud. He sat. Thaddeus let the silence hold for a moment. Then he said, "There is one more matter, Your Honor, and it is the one that matters most, because it does not concern this family's money. It concerns strangers. I would ask the court's permission to call a witness who is present today." The judge nodded. Javier Carrillo rose from the gallery behind us. He had worn his one good shirt, pressed within an inch of its life, and his hands trembled slightly as he came forward and took the oath. But his voice, when he spoke, did not tremble at all. I have heard a great many men speak under pressure. Few of them have spoken with the steadiness of that young engineer telling the truth in a room full of power. He explained what he had told me in the conference room, that Weston had ordered valves certified before the testing protocol was complete, that when a senior engineer refused, Weston had the failure logs altered, so that units which had failed the stress test were recorded as having passed. That these valves were not toys. They were pressure relief valves bound for ventilators and infusion pumps, for hospital beds, for people who could not breathe on their own. "I kept the originals," Javier said. "Every real test log, every email. I copied all of it, and I held on to it, because I kept thinking about the people on the other end of those valves. People who would never know any of our names." He looked at the judge. "I have a family. I needed the job, but I couldn't be the man who looked away." Thaddeus handed the final, thickest file to the bailiff. "The original test data, Your Honor, and the plaintiff's written instructions to falsify it, forensically verified." The courtroom had gone completely silent. The kind of silence that has weight to it, that presses on the ears. I looked at my son. The smirk was long gone. His face had drained to the color of ash. And beside him Brittany sat frozen, her carefully reapplied grief cracked and fallen away to show the raw fear underneath. Silas Stanton had quietly slid his chair an inch away from his own client, as a man slides away from something that might catch fire. Judge Russell read the last file slowly. Page after page. She read the altered logs. She read Weston's instructions in his own words. When she finally set the binder down, she did not pick up her gavel. Not yet. She removed her reading glasses, folded them with great care, and looked across the room at my son for a long, terrible moment. The way a person looks at something they can hardly believe is real. For a long moment, Judge Russell said nothing at all. The whole room waited on her silence, and the silence had a weight to it. The way the air goes heavy and still just before a structure that has been groaning under load finally lets go. Then she spoke, and her voice was no longer weary. It was cold and clear and edged with a controlled fury that filled every corner of the room. "In 31 years on the bench," she said, "I have seen a great many people abuse this court. I have rarely seen it done with such arrogance. You came into my courtroom this morning, sir, demanding that I freeze an innocent man's assets and hand you back a company, while presenting yourself as a victim. You are not a victim. You are a thief who walked into a court of law and asked the law to help him steal more." She picked up her gavel. "The petition for an emergency injunction is denied, and the civil suit filed by the plaintiff is dismissed in its entirety, with prejudice." The gavel came down with a crack, like a snapped bone, and it echoed off the high ceiling. For those who do not know the phrase, "dismissed with prejudice" is the end of the road. It does not mean try again later. It means the case is dead, permanently, thrown out forever, and the plaintiff is barred from ever bringing it again. The lawsuit Weston had filed to ruin me, the lawsuit he and Brittany had paraded across the morning news, was gone, finished, in the space of a single sentence. But Judge Russell wasn't finished. She turned the full force of her attention onto my son, Mr. Stevenson, she said, using the borrowed name he had chosen for himself, the name he had thrown his real one away for. "What I have seen in these documents this morning goes far beyond a family dispute. Forgery, embezzlement from an elderly woman's care, the falsification of safety test data on medical devices intended for hospital patients. These are not matters for a civil court to settle quietly. These are crimes, and some of them put the lives of strangers at risk." She leaned forward over the bench. "As an officer of this court, I have both the authority and the obligation to act on evidence of felonies presented before me. I am not returning this binder to the defense. I am retaining these documents as evidence, and I am referring this entire matter, today, to the District Attorney's Office and to the Medical Regulatory Authority for criminal investigation. The clerk will make that referral immediately." The words landed on the plaintiff's table like a dropped engine block. Silas Stanton had heard enough. I watched the survival instinct take him over completely. A lawyer can lose his license and face charges of his own for knowingly putting a client's perjury and fraud before a judge. And Stanton had no intention of going down with a ship he had only just realized was sinking. He did not ask the court's permission to be excused. He did not offer Weston a single word of counsel. He shoved his papers into his cheap briefcase, his hands shaking so badly that several pages spilled onto the floor, and he did not stop to gather them. Weston grabbed at his sleeve. "Wait," he said. "You can't just—" Stanton wrenched his arm free as though my son were contagious. "I withdraw as counsel," he announced to the room, loudly, "for the record. Effective immediately. I will not represent fraud." And he turned his back and walked fast up the center aisle and pushed through the heavy doors and was gone, leaving Weston and Brittany alone at a wide table surrounded by empty chairs. I sat very still beside Thaddeus, who calmly made one short note on his legal pad and then closed his binder. Finished. We had not raised our voices once. We had not needed to. The truth, laid out brick by brick, had done all the work. The bailiff began to clear the room. Weston rose unsteadily, as if his legs had stopped fully belonging to him, and he and Brittany walked out into the wide marble corridor in a silence so complete it was its own kind of noise. I followed at a distance, with Laney on my arm. I did not want to miss what came next, because I have spent my life watching things come apart, and I knew the sound a partnership makes in the moment it fails, out in that corridor, away from the judge, away from the cameras. Brittany stopped walking. She turned to face my son, and the careful, grieving mask she had worn for the news cameras slid off her face entirely. And what was underneath it was something I had seen only once before. The night she pointed at my mother and called her this one. She looked at Weston the way a drowning person looks at the one who is pulling them under. Brittany did not lower her voice in that corridor any more than she had lowered it at the dinner table. She had never learned how. But this time, the venom was not aimed at my mother, or at Laney, or at me. This time, it was aimed at the man standing right beside her. The man who had committed 3 kinds of fraud to keep her in villas and handbags. "You told me it was handled," she said. Her words came out low and shaking with rage. "You told me your father would never touch us. You told me the company was yours, the money was yours, all of it was yours. You swore to me." Weston put his hands up, the way a man does when he is trying to calm a fire he started. "Brittany, please. Not here. People are watching. We'll go home and we'll figure out home." She laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that bounced off the marble. "What home? You think there's going to be a home? You think there's going to be anything? They just sent it all to the district attorney. Do you understand what that means? Prison. They are talking about prison. And you did this. You and your forgeries and your test logs. I stood a few yards away with Laney on my arm. And I didn't look away. I have never been a man who enjoys cruelty. But there is a difference between cruelty and justice. And what I was watching was the second one wearing the face of the first. "I did it for you," Weston said, and his voice broke on the word. "Everything I did for you. The trips, the cars, the house. You wanted all of it. I just wanted to give it to you." It was the most honest thing I had heard him say in years, and it was also the most pathetic. He had robbed his grandmother and his parents and risked the lives of strangers. And he laid it all at the feet of a woman who was already backing away from him, because that was the thing. Brittany was not horrified that her husband was a criminal. She was horrified that he was a caught criminal, a poor one, a liability, the exact moment the money stopped. Her love, if it had ever been love, stopped with it. She was a creature who attached herself to wealth, and she could feel the wealth dying, and she was doing what such creatures do. She was abandoning the host. "Don't you dare put this on me," she hissed. "I never told you to forge anything. I never told you to fake those tests. That was you. All you. And I am not going down for it." She reached down to her left hand. She worked the rings off her finger, the diamond, and the band that Weston had bought with stolen money. And for a moment, I thought she might simply drop them. Instead, she drew her arm back and threw them at his chest. They struck his suit jacket and bounced and skittered away across the marble floor, and neither of them moved to pick them up. "I'm filing for divorce," she said. "Today. The second I leave this building. And if the district attorney offers me a deal, I will tell them everything. Every order you gave. Every signature you forged. I will testify against you. And I will not lose 1 minute of sleep over it." She straightened, lifted her chin, and delivered the last of it. You were never the man you pretended to be. I only married a fortune. And the fortune was never even yours." Then she turned on her expensive heels and walked away down the long corridor, her footsteps clicking sharp and final against the stone. And she pushed through the glass doors at the far end and was gone into the gray afternoon. She did not look back, not once. Weston did not chase her. He stood alone in the middle of that wide marble hall, staring at the spot where she had been. Slowly, his eyes drifted down to the rings glinting on the floor, and he did not bend to pick them up either. I think some part of him understood that they were evidence now, bought with stolen money, worth nothing to him but a longer sentence. He had lost it all in the span of a few days. The company that had given him his borrowed identity, the house he had forged his own mother's name to keep, the wife he had become a criminal to please, and, long before any of that, the family who would have loved him for nothing at all. If only he had let them. He lifted his head, and his eyes found mine across the corridor. He looked at me, and for once there was no smirk, no arrogance, no performance. There was only a man standing in the wreckage of a structure he had loaded past its limit, finally understanding that it had come down. I looked back at him with the same steady calm I had carried since that hallway on Thanksgiving night. I did not feel triumph. I felt the quiet that comes when a long, hard job is finally done. Then I put my hand over Laney's where it rested on my arm, and the two of us turned and walked out of the courthouse together, into the cold, clean air, leaving him standing there alone. The storm came in after dark, the kind of cold November rain that turns the streets to black glass. Laney and I had put my mother to bed, and we were sitting in the front room with the lamps low and a fire going, not talking much, just letting the quiet of a finished thing settle over the house. For the first time in a long time, our home felt like ours again. A little after 9, headlights swept across the front window. Then they cut out, and a car door slammed. And a few moments later, there came a knock at the door. Then another. Harder. Then a voice. "Dad, Dad, please. I know you're in there." Laney looked at me. I rose and went to the front window and drew the curtain back an inch. Weston stood on the porch in the pouring rain. He had no umbrella. He must have driven straight here from wherever he had been since the courthouse. And somewhere along the way the storm had soaked him through. His expensive suit, the navy one he had worn to play the wounded entrepreneur, hung off him heavy and dark and ruined. His hair was plastered to his forehead. He was shivering, and his face, lit by the porch light, was the face of a man who has finally run out of every road. I opened the door, but I didn't open the screen between us. I left it latched, a thin barrier, but I wanted it there. "Please," he said the moment he saw me. His voice cracked and came apart. "Please, Dad, Brittany's gone. She filed this afternoon. She took everything. She's telling them everything. I have nowhere to go. My cards don't work. I can't even get a room. I just need to come inside. I just need to sleep in my old room, just for tonight. And we can figure this out in the morning. Please. I'm your son." There it was. I'm your son. The last lever he had, and he pulled it with everything he had left. Behind me, I heard Laney come to stand in the hall. I did not turn. I kept my eyes on the man on my porch, dripping in the cold. And I thought about all the things I could have said. I thought about the care fund drained from his grandmother. I thought about my wife's name forged on a loan against the house he was now begging to enter. I thought about the valves, the strangers in hospital beds breathing through parts he knew might fail, and I thought about a sentence. One sentence, spoken across a white tablecloth on Thanksgiving night by the woman he had chosen over all of us. "Weston," I said. My voice was quiet and steady, and it carried clearly out into the rain. "Do you remember what your wife said at that table about your grandmother, about your mother, about me?" He shook his head, water running off his chin. "Dad, please. That wasn't," she said. I went on, "that people like us shouldn't show up in places like this. And you sat there. You took a sip of your wine, and you nodded." The rain filled the silence between us. "This," I said, "is one of those places. This house, the one your grandmother helped me pay for. The one your mother kept warm for 30 years. The one you forged her name to borrow against." I let that sit a moment. "And I have decided that people like you shouldn't show up in places like this." His face crumpled. He pressed his hand against the screen. And I watched the boy I had raised and the man he had become war with each other behind his eyes. And I felt the old ache rise one last time. The ache of a father. And I let it rise. And I let it pass. "I'll pay it back," he said, the words tumbling out. "Desperate. All of it. Grandma's money. The house. Everything. I'll work. I'll do anything. I'll sweep floors. Just don't let them put me in prison. Call them. Dad, you can call them. Tell them to drop it. Please." "No," I said. That was all. Just the one word. I did not lecture him. I did not list his crimes back to him, or tell him how he had broken his mother's heart, or explain the difference between the son I had wanted and the man I had gotten. There was nothing left to explain. He understood it now. I could see that he understood it. And understanding it had come far too late to matter. "I am responsible for my mother," I said quietly. "And for my wife. I am not responsible for you. Not anymore. You made yourself a stranger to this family. One signature at a time. Go and answer for what you did." He stood there a moment longer in the rain, his hand still pressed to the screen, waiting for me to change my mind, the way I always had. Every other time, for 36 years. I did not change my mind. I stepped back, and I closed the front door, slowly, until the latch caught. Then I reached over and switched off the porch light, and through the curtain, the bright shape of him went dark. Lainey came and put her head against my shoulder, and we stood together in the warm quiet of our own house. And we did not open the door again. The wheels of the law turn slowly, but they turn. And over the next 90 days, they ground my son down to nothing. The district attorney did not have to build much of a case. Thaddeus had handed them everything already, wrapped and labeled. And Brittany made good on her promise. She walked into their offices within the week and told them everything in exchange for immunity. Every order Weston had given, every signature he had forged, every test log he had altered. She testified against the man she had married as easily as she had thrown his rings across a marble floor, faced with the forged documents, the emptied care fund, the falsified medical data, and his own wife as a witness. Weston had no path left but one. His public defender, an overworked man with a stack of files a foot high, took one look at the evidence and told him plainly that fighting it in front of a jury would buy him a decade in a federal prison. So Weston did the only thing left to a cornered man. He pled. He signed a plea agreement in a cold, fluorescent room. To avoid hard prison time, he accepted years of strict supervised probation, a permanent felony record, and a court order of full financial restitution. He had to pay back every cent he had stolen from his grandmother and from us. And the judge made it brutally clear that a single missed payment, a single violation, would land him behind bars at once. A felon cannot run a company. A felon with that record cannot get within a mile of a medical firm, or a bank, or any office that would once have hired a young man in a Navy suit. The borrowed life was over, and there was nothing real underneath it to fall back on. So Weston went to work with his hands. There is a hardware and supply store across town, the kind of place that sells lumber and fertilizer and bags of concrete to contractors. And they hired him to stock the shelves and work the register at the bottom of the pay scale. He wears a stiff company vest now instead of a tailored suit. He spends his days lifting heavy bags onto the beds of other men's trucks. Men who once might have worked for him. And he takes the bus home at night because the cars are long gone. I did not arrange any of this. People assume I must have, that I must have pulled some string to put my son in a vest and behind a register. I did not. I simply stopped holding him up. And this is where a man lands when no one is holding him up, and he never learned to stand on his own. There is a hard kind of justice in watching a man who falsified the safety of machines spend his days hauling honest weight he cannot fake his way out of. He lives in a single rented room now, in a part of town where the plumbing leaks and the walls are thin, and the window looks out on a noisy intersection. It is smaller than the closet he used to have. He sleeps on a mattress on the floor. I know these things not because I check on him, but because Thaddeus keeps me informed of the restitution. And the restitution tells its own story, because here is the part that matters most. Before Weston ever sees $1 of his small paycheck, the court garnishes the maximum the law allows, and that money goes straight back where it belongs. It refills my mother's care fund, dollar by slow dollar. It pays down the loan forged against our house. He works until his hands are raw and his back aches. And every other week, the bulk of what he earns is taken from him and returned to the people he robbed, including the 89-year-old woman whose care he drained to buy his wife a warm winter pool. It will take him many years. He may be paying it back for the rest of his working life. The arrogance that once defined him, the smirk, the borrowed name, the talk of villas, has been ground completely out of him by the slow and patient machinery of consequence. He is a quiet man now, I am told, a tired one. He learned, far too late, the lesson I tried to teach him his whole life, which is that the only things truly yours are the things you build with your own 2 hands. I do not hate him. I want to be honest about that. A father does not get to stop loving his son the way you stop paying a bill. What I did was something harder than hate. I let him face what he had earned, and I did not lift a finger to soften it, because softening it had been my mistake for 36 years. And it had nearly cost my mother her last years of peace. That is what became of Weston. As for the woman who lit the match, the woman who pointed her finger at my mother and called her this one, Brittany did not walk away clean either, though she believed she would. What happened to her is a story of its own. Brittany got her immunity. She kept herself out of a cell. But there are sentences a court cannot hand down. and the world handed her one of its own. She had built her entire life on the appearance of wealth, on the country club brunches, and the right handbags, and the careful performance of belonging. That world is small, and it is merciless, and it does not forgive being broke. The story of the lawsuit had been on the morning news. The story of how it ended traveled even faster, the way the truth always does once it finally gets moving. Within a month, everyone who mattered to Brittany knew that the grieving wife on the courthouse steps had been married to a forger, that the villas had been paid for with stolen money, that there had never been any fortune at all. The invitations stopped. The friends stopped returning her calls. The same women who had air-kissed her at galas now turned their backs in restaurants, because nothing frightens that kind of crowd like the smell of ruin. With no money and a name gone radioactive, Brittany did the one thing she had spent her whole life swearing she would never do. She moved back into her childhood bedroom in her parents' modest house, the kind of house she had taught herself to look down on. Her parents had believed her lies about us for years. They had thought their daughter married into a fortune, and that the cruel old McBrides were keeping it from her. Now they knew the truth, and they had to live with the shame of it in front of every neighbor on their street. I am told Brittany spends her days in that small bedroom now, scrolling through pictures of the life she threw away, watching her former friends enjoy the warm pools and the bright vacations she will never see again. She consumed everything and built nothing. And in the end, she was left with exactly what she had made. Nothing. I take no joy in it. But I will not pretend I lost a single hour of sleep over it either. That is what became of the two of them. But this story is not really about them. And it never was. It is about the people they tried to throw away. And what we did, with the years, they could not take. Our house changed after that winter. The fog lifted. For 3 long years, every phone call had carried a hidden demand. Every family dinner had been a performance staged to extract something from us. When all of that ended, the silence that remained was not empty. It was warm. It was the quiet of a home that finally belonged to the people living in it. My mother is at the center of it. Regina is 90 now. Her mind drifts more often than it used to, the radio slipping off the station for longer stretches. But she is safe, and she is warm, and she has never once again been told that she does not belong at the table. Her care fund is filling back up, slow and steady, and a good woman comes 3 days a week to help us look after her. On her clear days, she sits in the sunroom with a blanket over her knees, and sometimes she takes my hand and tells me I was always a good boy. And on those days, I am 19 again, and I would do all of it 100 times over to keep her that safe. And there is Javier, the young engineer who could have looked away and chose not to. When I took the company back, I made him my lead engineer, and within the year, I made him a partner. He runs the place now, the real work of it, the honest building of an honest thing. He reminds me of myself at his age, except that he had the courage at 28 that took me 67 years to fully learn. He named his second child after my mother, Regina. I do not have the words for what that did to me. It is a strange thing, the way a family works. The son I made by blood threw us all away for a warm pool and a borrowed name. And a stranger from the back of the shop, who owed me nothing, turned out to be more of a son to me than the one I raised. The patent I built to provide for my own family ended up providing for his. And somehow, that feels exactly right. One evening in early spring, Lainey and I sat in the front room after my mother had gone to bed. The restitution had been coming in steadily, the care fund nearly whole again, the loan on the house paid down, and Lainey turned to me with a look I knew well. The look she gets when she has been thinking about something for a long time and has finally decided. "Amos," she said, "when all of it is paid back, when Regina's taken care of and the house is clear, what do we do with what's left? Because I don't want to just keep it. That's not what it's for." I had been thinking the very same thing. In the quiet way I think about everything. And I had an answer ready. I did not answer her right away. Some questions deserve a slow reply, and that was one of them. Outside the window, the first snow of the season was beginning, the kind that falls without any weight and settles without making a single sound. I sat there in the quiet and thought about everything that money could buy back, every broken thing it might repair. Then I thought about the one thing it never could, no matter how much of it a man had. And at last, I understood why I had hesitated so long before speaking the simple truth she was patiently waiting for me to say out loud. We did not keep the money. That surprised a great many people. A man spends 40 years protecting one single invention, fights his own son in open court to keep it, and then turns around and gives the proceeds away. But I had learned something in those long courtroom months and in the even longer nights that came after them. A thing is only ever worth what it protects. My valve was never truly about pressure ratings or licensing fees or royalty checks. It was about the single fragile moment when a system fails, and whether that system holds or breaks when everything that matters in the world depends on it. So we built a fund, not a grand one with my name carved into marble somewhere for strangers to admire. A quiet one, managed carefully through Thaddeus and a small board that included Javier. It pays for elder care for families who cannot afford it, in exactly the way that Regina's own care had once been quietly stolen out from under her, while the rest of us slept and suspected nothing. We called it the Palacios Fund, after my mother's maiden name. She is 90 years old now. When I finally told her about it, she reached out and held my hand the same way she had held it when I was a small boy, and the whole world was a far simpler place. She said only 5 words. "Your father would have approved." I had to leave the room for a moment just to gather myself back together. Weston wrote to us once, several months after the sentencing. It was a short letter, with no excuses, buried anywhere inside it, which was honestly the first fully honest thing he had managed to do in years. He wrote that he understood now that he had spent his entire life desperately trying to become someone other than the boy who grew up in a mechanic's modest house, and that in doing so, he had carelessly thrown away the only thing that had ever truly belonged to him. He did not ask to come home. I did not invite him to, but I wrote back to him. 3 lines and no more. I told him plainly that the door was not locked forever, only that it would open on his honesty and on absolutely nothing else. That is not forgiveness. I want to be clear about that. Forgiveness is a long and difficult road, and he has so far taken only the very first step upon it. People sometimes ask me whether I feel triumphant about how all of it ended. I do not, and I never have. There is simply no triumph to be found in watching your own son walk slowly down a path that you cannot follow him on. What I feel instead is something much closer to quiet. The pressure is finally gone. The system held when it counted the most. And in the end, that is all I ever truly asked of it. Lainey and I take Regina out to the coast now, whenever her fragile health allows us to. We sit together and watch the cold water work patiently against the rocks. Slow and steady and tireless. The way that real and lasting change always seems to arrive. Brittany, from what I'm told, lives back at her parents' house once more, far removed from the gleaming life she had once bragged so loudly about. And I find that I think of her almost never anymore. Javier's youngest daughter, a bright little girl, is named Regina, and she calls my mother Big Regina. My mother pretends every single time to be deeply insulted by the nickname and loves it more than anything else in the entire world. Here is what I learned, and it is genuinely the only thing I came all this way to tell you. A family is a machine like any other machine ever built. It runs entirely on trust. And trust is the one single part that you cannot ever manufacture. Only slowly earn, and then earn all over again. When somebody strips it down for parts, you do not repair that kind of damage by shouting. You repair it the same patient way you repair anything that truly matters in this life. You find exactly where it first failed. You take full responsibility for whatever was rightfully yours to maintain. And then you build it back stronger and steadier than it ever was before, even while knowing it can never again be quite the same. That night, I finally answered Lainey's question. I told her the money should go wherever it could hold something fragile together for somebody else. She nodded slowly, in the way she always does when I have finally said the thing she already knew. Then she rested her head against my shoulder, and together we watched the snow fill the same yard where, 30 long years ago, I had once taught a small boy how to properly hold a wrench. They told my mother that she should not show up in places like that one. In the very end, she is the name printed on a fund that will outlast every single one of us. That is the only answer I ever truly needed to give them, and the only one that ever mattered at all. Thank you for sitting with this story all the way through to the end. If any part of it meant something to you, please share it with a man who needs to hear it today. Because dignity is not for sale. And the quiet ones are almost always the strongest people standing in the room.